live determines where you die. This is an act that I stand by because I do believe that where you live can determine where you die, because we do not have equal health care in America as much as we'd like to believe it. But there are certain neurological studies that have shown that even the place you live can affect your neurological brain development. But more importantly, we should focus on reducing health disparities in order to solve problems like neurological, biological, and environmental effects from healthcare. So the first thing that we should tackle in these health disparities is the price of resources and treatments. As you can see, there have been protests of people protesting specifically insulin, which is a great example of how prices of medicine and treatment, resources and treatment, have a huge effect on citizens in a population. A researcher, Elizabeth Tsao, states, in resources likely afforded by the more affluent may lead to different brain structures. And she's actually the person that did the study on socioeconomic disparities on the brain, meaning that she was able to find a connection between where you live and how you work after having those effects done to you. So I just listed a few examples from Time Magazine, Case and Deaton's study, where they primarily focused on resources that were too expensive, such as private health insurance companies, even job provided insurance or healthcare, that can seem like a cheaper option, but can oftentimes lead to having the same price points as a private insurance. But yeah. Next, another huge problem that we have is that according to the National Library of Medicine, there's a disproportionate burden of exposure on valuable populations. And by exposure, I mean environmental exposure, because these urban communities that usually are low income are oftentimes affected by the air pollution and the bad quality of living that they have after being surrounded by so many chemicals and gases that their bodies should not be intaking. So it is also sad that their communities do not have as many clean air laws, but more affluent communities, as stated on the presentation, do pass more clean air laws, although the lower income communities are the ones that may need it more. Which can lead me to my next point, is that there's a thing called racism, placism. And I learned this in a Chicago Health article by Katie Scarlett Brandt, and she mentioned that in Chicago specifically, polarized neighborhoods remain economic and food deserts, meaning that they never really see an increase in their economic status, and their food is more artificially impacted. So that means that racism, specifically placism, is that the belief that a certain place is superior to another. And when you compare a suburb in a city versus the urban life, you can see that there may be more healthcare options, maybe more resources, even cheaper resources than those in urban communities that do want to see the difference in healthcare, but they do not have the money to get it to happen. Which now leads to our solutions to these three problems. Our first solution being that we have more cost-effective healthcare and provide that primary health care to not only people that can afford it, but that are recommended the treatments that they need, because most of the time nowadays people cannot afford the treatments, or they have to look for other ways to afford them. So by finding more ways to, or by having more incentives and less bias in our healthcare, we can achieve a more equal access to primary healthcare. Next, we should enforce these laws. Now, a lot of urban communities do take the steps to make these environmental protections. However, we need to hold our governments accountable for executing these. These communities should not only hear about the protections happening in them, but they should see the visible difference that is happening with these protections in their community. Next, we should exclusively focus on the group that needs it most, which is low-income communities, because low-income communities are struggling the most when it comes to these healthcare guidelines and such. We can focus on these low-income communities by paying attention and creating more community healthcare centers. I know in Cicero specifically, when I lived there, there was only a few doctor's offices that were more like free clinics, and although they were very helpful to these lower income communities or more urban communities than the more expensive privately owned clinics, they oftentimes fill up with more people, there is more wait time, and by putting more money where our mouth is, we should open more community health centers to really help these community members that need it most, because they cannot sit around waiting for healthcare to change for them. And by doing these 3 things as solutions, we can find balance and serenity in our healthcare system and its disparities. By listening to these social sciences, like previously said, the neurological, socioeconomic effects on the brain, and also just listening to people that are protesting for their rights to have the right medicine, we can see a huge difference and find advantages in equality. We can also see the value of the low-income communities, and yes, thank you.